Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would discuss a big cohort study that came out a couple days ago. I saw it come through my social media, thought it was interesting, read through it. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Now, every time we discuss nutritional science, we get, how do I word it, ass clowns from every single group who want to jump in and scream and throw a temper tantrum and say that I'm looking at biased science. Look guys, I'm looking at the mainstream science. And the funny part is the people who scream the loudest are people whose diets are incompatible with each other. It's like the extreme keto people and now the carnivore diet people, right? They all scream and throw temper tantrums that I'm not looking fairly at the science. And then the vegans on the other extreme, so two diets that are completely incompatible. Basically, you have two diets that allow zero overlap of food intakes, right? All the vegans scream and yell that I'm killing people with mainstream science also when we discuss this. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in either one of your silly ass theories. I'm in my 40s. Heart disease runs in my family. Right now I'm dropping body fat. I am trying to be healthier and fitter. I am not gambling my life on any of your stupid ass philosophies or your theories. Okay? Let's get that out of the way. So if you think that you're going to throw some harebrained theory and you can find 7 doctors in the entire world who agree with you, when you have 1,000 registered dietitians and 1,000 MDs all looking at the same data disagreeing with you, then you're a moron who's trying to hurt me and other people. You need to shut up. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. You can go make your own YouTube channel to discuss it. My platform, when I'm trying to help people and I'm trying to help myself, is not the appropriate place for your weird ass philosophies. All right? And I'm not saying it's wrong for you to do that. If you want to follow a carnivore diet or you want to follow a vegan diet or you want to follow any diet you want, that is your business. You have a right to do that. And I believe that you have a right to do that. I wouldn't take that right away from you. You have a right to have whatever opinion you want about it. But don't expect everyone else who's actually reading all the host of the data and the big meta-analysis and the cohort studies and everything to agree with your silly ass fringe theories that disagree with what the main data says. Expecting us to believe it is unreasonable. You're as bad as religious cults who go around trying to recruit people. All right? Not interested. All right? So let's get that out of the way up front. All right, I will link this probably in the comments somewhere because, again, people say, why don't you link it? Because it's a hassle. YouTube doesn't always like it when I link studies in a description because, you know, it's complicated YouTube rule, right? Complicated YouTube rule. So I don't get in trouble ever for putting a link to a scientific study in the comments, but I have in the descriptions before. So it seems to be allowed within their rules. So that being said, I'll probably throw it in there. But it's interesting. I think it was looking at like 11 different countries, all these different events as far as all-risk mortality, cardiovascular events, strokes, everything else. And they looked at overall intake of dairy and how it was correlated with this. Now, we need to understand correlation is not causation. All right, let's make that clear. Correlation is not causation. But usually, when something causes something, you can find some correlation first, right? So you look for correlation. See, is these two things associated with each other? Then we look for the evidence that one causes the other, right? That's what you're looking for. But you look for correlation first. And if something is correlated or negatively correlated with something, it can give you an idea as if there's even causation at all. So in other words, if dairy in general is a health problem, it's going to cause heart attacks and cancer and everything else, all risk mortality, then you would expect to find evidence of that. Meaning they would at least be correlated, meaning people who drink more milk or eat more yogurt or eat more cheese would be dying at a higher rate, right? Than people who don't. That's what you would expect to see. And if you see that, then you dig deeper and say, okay, let's investigate further because these things are associated with each other. You know, they're associated with each other. That's how it works, guys. And if they aren't, or if you find, for example, that people who eat the most strawberries have slightly lower rates of strokes than other people, it's probably fair to assume that strawberries don't cause strokes. Doesn't mean that strawberries protect against strokes necessarily. Now that might be the case, In fact, that would be worth investigating at that point. But at that point, only a really dumb person would say that strawberries cause strokes. People understand if people who eat the most strawberries have slightly, like 0.5% lower rates of strokes than people who don't eat strawberries at all, we sure wouldn't be saying, well, the people who don't eat the strawberries have slightly more strokes, so the strawberries aren't causing strokes. This shouldn't be too complicated. Hopefully it's not. This goes over some people's head. But that's the idea, guys. So they look at all the dairy. They look at different dairies, and what they found was that people who consumed the most milk and yogurt had slightly lower all-cause mortality, slightly lower cardiovascular disease, right? It wasn't a massive difference, but the correlation there could indicate a protective benefit. It doesn't mean that it does, but it's certainly something going on. And here's what you need to look at. Any food is a complex substance. Unless you are dealing with a pure extract of some type, there's a lot of different things in foods. So you might find something in a food that could be causative of a certain condition, but something else that is protective in a way that outweighs it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense also. You're dealing with a complex matrix of stuff. In other words, if you got poison and the medicine mixed together, to put it in layman's terms, you might find a threshold to where the medicine outweighs the poison, or the antidote outweighs the poison, right? To the point to where it's actually healthier to consume the whole mix just slightly. Now, that's not necessarily the best example, but you get the idea. So you take this complex matrix, and now we could talk about the fact, well, there is saturated fat and stuff in a lot of dairy. In most dairy, some exceptions. So that is cause for concern, particularly in excess. It's cause for concern in excess, but yet we see people have lower events of all this stuff when they consume fair amounts of it. So it might be reasonable to say, okay, there's something complex going on in here. There could be some protective aspects to this. Maybe it's the additional calcium. Maybe it's the magnesium. Maybe it's the higher quality protein is doing something that's beneficial. So we don't necessarily know that. We could speculate. And there's a lot of speculation on those things, but it seems to be the case that it doesn't seem to be a problem here. In fact, if anything, again, people seem to be living slightly longer. They seem to have lower rates of mortality, lower rates of cardiovascular disease if they consume more of these dairy products. Now, what they found is that cheese didn't seem to have an impact, positive or negative. Well, there's a different mix of stuff in cheese than there is in yogurt or in milk, right? There's actually going to be usually a little less protein in some cases per calorie, maybe, depends on the mix. Maybe less calcium. There's certainly a lot more fat. So maybe that's what's going on. Maybe because the cheese has a much higher concentration of saturated fat versus whatever other stuff is in there, it's losing the protective benefits and it seems to balance out neutral. Now, they didn't get data on butter. And again, that's interesting. That would have been nice to see, because if we wanted to go in that direction, butter takes it to the next step further. Most of the protein and everything else is removed, and now you're dealing with almost pure milk fat is what butter mostly is, milk fat and salt. Now, if we're concerned with the saturated fat, and then maybe think there's other stuff with protective benefits, the butter might be the one you really want to look at to see, does that cause the heart disease? Because that's our most likely scenario. I mean, and I'm the first person to tell people you probably don't want to put butter on your food. We have to have some common sense, guys. This is where we look at all the data and say, where's the common sense? All right, we know that dairy seems to be overall healthy, right? The indication it is, irrespective of what everyone from vegans to paleo people claim, the overall data tends to show good health outcomes with large amounts of dairy. People tend to be leaner. They have lower cancer rates. They even have lower osteoporosis rates, in spite of the claims of certain people. That just seems to be the case. But it is saturated fat and things in a lot of dairy that we should probably be concerned with excessive intake of. We should. Well, butter would be the most extreme example. So, a reasonable person could look at that and say, well, in spite of all this, dairy is pretty reasonable. Seems to be reasonably healthy. In fact, there's a lot of health benefits to a lot of dairy. But do I need to be slapping pure dairy fat on my food? Do I need to be dumping heavy cream in my stuff? Do I need to be slapping butter on everything? Probably not. Probably not. If you want to moderate your saturated fat, that's probably not the best way to do it. See, that's where we throw some common sense in. little bit of common sense goes a long way. Instead of looking at all the extremes, we look at some of this data and say, well, we sure didn't get any data on butter. That's the one we should really be concerned about the most. So you know what? I'm not going to look at a study like this and say, well, I should be slapping butter on everything and dumping heavy cream on everything, right? We didn't get data on that, but we did get something that we could extrapolate, that the other dairy produced positive benefits, and those benefits seem to have been lost in its neutral when you go to cheese. Well, butter is like the next step beyond cheese in the other direction of the processing of the dairy, right? The highest concentration of just the fat with a lot of the other stuff gone. A reasonable person might say, okay, well, maybe that isn't good. Maybe we shouldn't be slapping butter on stuff. I don't feel like slapping butter on my food. Probably not a good idea. Right? See how simple that is? Use a little common sense. But overall, all the studies generally tend to indicate that dairy seems to be generally good for health. It's not associated with cancers like everyone wants to scream. It's not associated with the heart disease that everyone screams about. Right? It just isn't. And we know from the muscle building and body composition effects, the studies tend to produce very good results. I mean, dairy proteins in general are really, really good for building muscle and for athletes, right? Seems to be pretty well documented in the literature. So again, the take home of this, guys, dairy's fine within reason. That's the take home. That's what a common sense would look at all this and say. But you might not want to overdo it on the butter. Hell, you might not even want to overdo it on the cheese. That's what a reasonable person would conclude from looking at this data, right? All right, there you have it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.